Greetings to everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Alan Reddick here to welcome you to the Red Circle's 7th virtual meeting. We look forward to a very enjoyable time today. And since it is our 7th time together, it's in cyberspace. We've been together at the Red Circle a lot longer than that, but 7th time in cyberspace. I just wanted to take a quick second here at the beginning to remind you that recordings of all of our virtual meetings are available at the website. And that's important for you to know. And in fact, I wanted to give you a quick rundown of what those are. The first one was, gosh, it was a long time ago, it seems, but it wasn't all that long ago. July of 2020, we chatted with Lori R. King about her new book, Riviera Gold. Then in September of last year, Nick Meyer joined us from London to talk about British beginnings, the early days of Sherlockian societies across the pond. And it was just a year ago that we welcomed Matthias Bostrom on the subject of Sherlock Holmes in the 20s. In March of this year, Catherine Cook told us all about Mr. Bradshaw and his railway guide. Then in July, Peggy Perdue was here with a journey through Sherlock Holmes and advertising. And that was followed a month later by our joint presentation with the Reichenbach Irregulars of Switzerland, where we examined Holmes's roots from the Reichenbach. And in just a few days, we'll be adding today's meeting with Nick Meyer to the library. How do you find the recordings? Just go to the Red Circle website and find the archive box in the upper right-hand corner. The archive is divided into 4 sections, and you'll want to select this one, writings and videos right here. That'll take you to the listings, and you'll be able to watch the presentations. And I hope you'll do that. So with that, it is time to introduce the man without whom the Red Circle wouldn't be the Red Circle. He is, of course, the man who's been to every single Red Circle meeting, wouldn't miss one for the world. Turn things over now to Peter Blau. Hi, Peter.
Thank you, Alan. I hope you all can hear me. I just want to say that Sherlockians owe a great debt to the Writers Guild of America. And so does Nicholas Meyer, our guest speaker. Who has written, in 1972, the Writers Guild strike changed my life dramatically. And so it did. Forced to walk a picket line rather than write scripts, he began work on a novel he called The 7% Solution, which was published in 1975 and was on the New York Times bestseller list for 40 weeks and helped launch an explosion of interest in Sherlock Holmes. Now, that explosion of interest was assisted by the Royal Shakespeare Company's revival of William Gillette's play, Sherlock Holmes, and the film of The 7% Solution, which was released in 1976 and won Nick an Oscar nomination for the Best Adapted Screenplay. He went on to write the film Time After Time in 1979, which includes a nice shout out for Sherlock Holmes. He directed and wrote 2 Star Trek films that many fans consider the best of that series. He directed The Day After in 1983, a television film that has been credited with having helped persuade the Reagan administration to begin work on nuclear disarmament, and to write more Sherlockian pastiches. Now, you can read about his career in his memoirs on both sides of the Atlantic. You're the American on the left and the British edition on the right. Out of print, but they're easy to find on eBay and ABE books. Nick's latest pastiche, The Return of the Pharaoh, which was published this year, winning Nick renown for having written about Sherlock Holmes for more years than Conan Doyle did. Now, we're happy to have Nick as our guest speaker today. The title of his paper is The Great Escape. And after his talk, he'll be happy to answer questions, which you can submit via chat to Alan Reddick. So over to you, Nick. Welcome to Washington.
Peter, thank you for those kind words of introduction. Greetings and condolences to my fellow Sherlockians and members of the Red Circle. What follows is dedicated to the memory of Mike Whelan, BSI, one of the best and wisest men I, and I suspect others within earshot, have ever known. The late Hikaru Mishima, president and CEO of Kurosawa Heavy Industries, recently observed, "The internet allows no secret." I cite Mishima's comment by way of excuse. some of what you are about to hear has been bruited elsewhere. I apologize. It turns out I have only so many things to say. Leo Tolstoy, the author of my favorite novel, War and Peace, said that the purpose of art is to teach us to love life, an observation that has pleased me since I first heard it. But on reflection, I think it fair to say there's other things that art can do in relation to life. It can help us to understand life or change the way we see life. It can teach us to endure or perhaps enable us to escape life altogether. Mark that word, escape. In a world beset by unprecedented horrors, where the survival of the planet itself seems to dangle by a fraying thread, art can sometimes grant us respite, time as it were, to catch our breath. Art can take us out of ourselves, plunging us, however briefly, into less hostile alternative worlds, worlds of beauty and make-believe, worlds that allow us to pause from day-to-day anxiety and panic, a time out in which to surrender to enchantment, to collect ourselves so as to return refreshed and perhaps inspired to resume the ongoing battle with reality. Art as a form of meditation. The art that is able to accomplish this may not necessarily or always be great art. It might be Mozart or Shakespeare, but it could also be the less exalted variety, like, for example, the satisfaction of curling up with a good mystery story at bedtime. Detective stories are, as many will allow, a source of great comfort, which is strange if you think about it. After all, detective stories promise death and bloody destruction, serial killers and mayhem, severed body parts with corpses splayed at unnatural angles, the skulls fractured by blunt instruments wielded by a person or persons unknown. How can this stuff be comforting? Because detective literature, for all its protestations of thrills, gore, and procedural authenticity, frequently delivers the exact opposite of what it promises. Unlike life, in which dreadful things happen for no reason, where children are struck by lightning or drunk drivers, in detective stories, as the gumshoe sooner or later observes, it all adds up. In detective literature, unlike life, nothing happens without a rhyme or reason. So yes, we love detective stories because they help us escape real life. It is a superficial escape, to be sure. It isn't a total transfusion like Mozart, who has unfortunately been elevated to a form of castor oil. Listen to your Mozart, it will make you smarter. Detective stories, by contrast, are what some people call guilty pleasures. And let's admit it frankly, some pleasures are all the keener because they're guilty. And we feel we should be spending our time on more worthwhile things, but we cannot resist the siren call of "Come, Watson, the game's afoot." I write Sherlock Holmes stories for the same reason I read them, to divert my attention from the terrifying issues that plague the rest of my waking hours. Drought, famine, wildfires, limits on voting rights, Fox News, anti-vaxxers. But for a few hours, when I read or write Sherlock Holmes stories, I am transported to what appears to be a simpler world, where a creature of superhuman intelligence, nobility, compassion, and yes, frailty can make sense of it all. Was the Victorian world, in fact, simpler than this one? We've no way of knowing, but like an audience willing itself to believe that the magic trick is really magic. We are conniving accomplices to our own beguilement. I've now written 5 Sherlock Holmes novels. I didn't plan on writing more than one, and I don't write them unless I have an idea that seems right for Holmes. Ideas of any kind do not come easily or plentifully to me. As an example, 26 years passed between the time I wrote The Canary Trainer and when I wrote The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols. The idea has to be good enough that it teases my brain and won't let go. When I should be doing other things, grown-up things, like earning a living, instead, I am lying awake and riffing on what has begun taking shape in my mind. I self-censor easily. If I can poke holes in my idea, it becomes natural, if not inevitable, that I lose interest and drop it. My novels fall into the category now pejoratively labeled pastiche. Pastiche isn't really a pejorative term, but it seems to have become one, which I confess I find irritating. All art is a history of cut and paste. Are James Bond movies different with different Bonds not also pastiches? Star Treks with different Spocks? As Michael Chabon has observed, all fiction is fan fiction. What are the Odyssey and the Aeneid but fanboy spin-offs? There is something to be said for pouring new wine into old bottles. Don't we sometimes get off on listening to covers of the Beatles just to see what someone else does with their songs? Isn't it cool to hear Sinead O'Connor's riff on Nothing Compares to You? To listen to Tiffany's version of I Think We're Alone Now? The words of the Catholic Mass are pretty standardized, but who would argue that Mozart's Requiem, Bach's B minor Mass, Verdi's Requiem, or Haydn's Mass in Time of War are pastiches? The music makes them different. Seeing what can be done with Holmes and Watson while adhering to the rough outlines set forth by Doyle seems to me as legitimate a challenge as setting new music to the text of the Dies Irae. No one confuses Mozart with Verdi. Most of my ideas reach me indirectly. They begin as someone else's. However, in incoherent form, I trip over them, or someone primes my thought pump. What about Holmes and I'm off and running. Sherlock Holmes meets Sigmund Freud. Holmes in London's theater world. Holmes encounters the Phantom of the Opera. Holmes and the protocols of the learned elders of Zion. And now Holmes in Egypt. This last notion was no more than those 3 words, suggested by my longtime agent and manager and friend, Alan Gasmer. It was all I needed. The book is dedicated to him for a reason. I find that taking Holmes out of his element, England, and specifically London, making him in effect a fish out of Thames water, allows my creative juices to flow. I am not interested in limiting myself to Doyle's vocabulary or never allowing Holmes an action that he hasn't performed earlier someplace. Mere variations along those lines strike me as inevitably a species of taxidermy. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but in my opinion, in order for Holmes to come to life, he must change. But he must always change in character. It is a fine and arguably abstract line that I am drawing, and while I've no doubt there are Doyle imitators who successfully adhere more literally and literarily to Doyle than I do, I am not certain the results are more lifelike. Of course, I've not read that many other Holmes novels and stories for 2 reasons. Firstly, because there are now so many that if I attempted to canvass the competition, I'd never have time to read anything else. Secondly, I shy away from other Holmes books, not because I suspect they might be dreadful, but because I am just insecure enough to fear they might be better, much better than my own attempts. I've read some that are, and the result is a kind of brain freeze where I become creatively inhibited, or worse, I start to imitate other Doyle imitators. Homes in Egypt fired my imagination. When I was a kid, the RKO Movie Palace on 3rd Avenue and 58th Street, an entire city block, was where I was largely educated. There I saw such masterpieces as The Egyptian with Victor Mature, Gene Simmons, Gene Tierney, and an indifferent actor named Edmund Purdom. It was supposed to be Marlon Brando, but he refused the part and wound up playing Napoleon and Desiree instead. Then they showed Valley of the Kings with Robert Taylor and Eleanor Parker. Unlike the backlot filmed Egyptian, the Valley of the Kings was actually filmed in Egypt and took place more or less at the same period as My Return of the Pharaoh. The film contains priceless on-site footage of the gigantic statues at Abu Simbel before they were disassembled and moved to make way for the Aswan Dam. But perhaps most impressive of all was Howard Hawks's Egyptian entry, Land of the Pharaohs, also filmed on location, and then in Egypt with a cast that was literally thousands. This is before CGI. Jack Hawkins, Joan Collins, and Sidney Chaplin, and mainly Joan Collins, headed a cast, and William Faulkner was credited as one of the screenwriters. Howard, how does a pharaoh talk? Faulkner reportedly inquired of Howard Hawks, who explained that pharaohs talk like antebellum Southern gentlemen. Faulkner went away. 6 months later, he came back with another question. Howard, what does a pharaoh do? And let us not forget Dmitri Tiomkin's wonderfully exotic score as Joan Collins is buried alive. If ancient Egyptian music didn't sound like this, it should have. And we're not counting all those Curse of the Mummy sagas from Universal in spooky black and white. And last, certainly not least, speaking of music, there is Verdi's stupendous Aida, another buried alive tale in which certain lavish productions include elephants and camels on stage. I've remarked elsewhere on how deeply childhood exposure to people, experiences, and art imprints on the brain and soul. Exposed to them as a kid, these Egyptian-based stories left a deathless impression. Later, reading about Howard Carter discovering the tomb of Tutankhamun and reading Cecilia Holland's wonderfully intricate and inventive novel, Valley of the Kings, reinforced my fascination, as did the life of Schliemann, the reckless father of archaeology and discoverer of Troy. In other words, over 60 years of Egyptian fodder was sticking to me by the time Alan Gasmer said, "What about Holmes in Egypt?" I had seen enough, read enough, and remembered enough to get my juices flowing. What followed of necessity was an enormous amount of research. Whether it's a novel or a screenplay, entering a different narrative milieu is like starting medical or law school. You write down everything because you've no way of knowing at the start what will prove pyrite or gold. You go for long walks, notebook in hand. You think about possibilities as you fall asleep and as you wake. You try things in different combinations. Somehow, the result must seem inevitable, one event leading inexorably to the next. Besides our dynamic duo, who are the characters? What are Holmes and Watson doing in Egypt? What is the mystery? Hint, a body always helps. How much description can the reader used to moving pictures in all venues tolerate? How much modern and how much ancient Egyptian do you and the reader need to know in order to follow the story? How much information is too much? Research is like painting stage scenery. All you need is what the audience to see, not what's hidden in the wings, fascinating though it may be. It was certainly to my advantage that in 1979, I visited Egypt and saw in person many of the sights and experienced many of the sensations I relate in the novel. And yes, using the robber's entrance, I even climbed inside the bowels of the Great Pyramid, not for the claustrophobic. Written during the COVID pandemic, The Return of the Pharaoh was a marvelous distraction. I fell in love with the world and the people of my novel and hunkered down in my office as weeks and then months flew by. I know all too well that others, many others, were not so lucky. I can only hope that those who survived, when and if they read the book, may belatedly obtain some of the escapist pleasures that served me so well when I created it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. What a wonderful presentation. So good to hear from you. Questions are piling up as we speak, and we'll start with Karen Murdoch. Are you there? Turn on your microphone and your camera and say
There
hi
we
to
go.
Nick.
Okay, I just unmuted myself. The Nicholas, you mentioned the guilty pleasures in reading detective novels. Do you really think there's such a thing as guilty pleasures? I mean, unless you're hurting somebody else or you're committing a crime, if your pleasure is bopping people over the head and robbing them, that's bad. But I think I've got a pretty robust conscience, and I don't feel guilty about reading detective novels at all.
Good. I think I kind of revel in the notion of guilty pleasures. I think even Doyle sort of suspected that Holmes was a guilty pleasure for him. He said, he takes my mind from better things. And I think in that sense, he sometimes probably liked to curl up with a good mystery as well. I think also the world is filled with examples of authors who were sort of taunted into writing. H. Rider Haggard wound up writing King Solomon's Mines because he thought he said to his brother-in-law that he could write a better book than Treasure Island, and his brother-in-law said, "I'd like to see you try." And for me, writing Sherlock Holmes is certainly a guilty pleasure. Otherwise, I might, try to write a real novel, which, I've done on occasion. And they're never going to be as successful as piggybacking on Holmes is likely to be. I think Holmes and detective stories do occasionally take my mind from better things, more industrious or selfless preoccupation. In fact, reading, for pleasure is a kind of guilty thing altogether. I mean, there's so much crap going on in the world, and we're supposed to be trying to help and make it a better place. And instead, I'm, sitting down and reading, Don Winslow or whoever, and thinking, is this really the best use of my remaining years? And should I be doing this? And then I go, yes, I should. And that's what that for me is the guilty part. And you relish it because it's guilty.
You agree, Karen?
You have an even stronger conscience than I have.
Well, that's a great testimony then, I guess. Next on the list, Roger Kilshaw. Roger, turn your microphone on and say hi.
Good evening.
Hi.
What is your view, or the Ruskinian view of the intention of art?
Well, remind me of what it was, because I've read Ruskin, and I've read that is it the Stones of Gothic?
Venice.
Stones of Venice, yeah. And I also read him on the subject of Gothic architecture.
Gothic. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know but what if you were to summarize his theory, because what I remember about it is that Ruskin preferred Gothic architecture to the molding in your drawing room, because Gothic architecture was the creation of human individuals with all their flaws. And then he said, now take a look at the molding in your living room, and you know that that's perfect, but it was also made by a machine and could have been made by anybody.
Yeah.
But it led him to a socialism in a way, did it not also as a...
Yes, very much so, yes. His view of art was to improve the human condition, and particularly those within the Industrial Revolution in Britain who were at the lower end, that it would improve them.
Well, I think art does improve the human condition. I don't think it has to set out to improve the human condition to do that. I think it is an innate function, whether it's a byproduct or a direct product, in my opinion. That's what art winds up doing. Some way it expands your relationship to life in ways that may or may not be useful, helpful, ennobling, disturbing, but it definitely expands things, and it takes you places. And the best of it returns you to earth, but slightly different. You know, Hamlet dies saying he's not really sad when he dies. He's learned something. Draw your breath in pain a while to tell my sad story to the world. Yeah, that's not a bad way to go. And I think art sort of can do that, and inevitably does it. I don't even think it has to try. In fact, I think if it tries, it may fumble. It may become didactic, or, you know, what's interesting, for example, is George Bernard Shaw, who definitely fell into that category of saying, I want plays that teach.
Yeah.
I mean, long prefaces and whatever. But he was so damn talented that his characters always wound up overwhelming his educational aspiration. Nobody remembers what the point of Pygmalion is, which is that how you talk defines who you are. They just remember Liza and Henry, who, by the way, are the most perfect ripoffs of Holmes of all the pastiches. Henry Higgins and Colonel Pickering of 27A Wimpole Street with Mrs. Pierce, the landlord. You know, come on. I digress.
I had never thought of that, but you know, I was just watching My Fair Lady again the other night, and you're absolutely correct. It's amazing. Yeah.
Well, first of all, there is a long history of dynamic duos who are deducers, starting with Quixote and Sancho. Quixote explains to Sancho, who's the Watson of this story, that is not a windmill, it's a giant. And Sancho, you can imagine him saying, by God, Quixote, how did you come to know that? And he was saying, elementary, my dear Sancho. And when Shaw wrote Pygmalion, Holmes was at his height of popularity. He ripped him off very creatively. But Holmes is all, you know, Higgins, whose name even starts with H, as does Dr. House in that television show House. These are all nods to Sherlock. And Higgins is also a deducer. It's limited to where you come from, what your speech is. And Pickering, you know, back from India, as opposed to Watson back from Afghanistan, is saying, oh my goodness, Higgins, how did you come to, you know?
Yeah, there's an old joke among comedians that there are only 7 jokes in the world. Do you think that carries across to literature as well?
Probably.
Yeah.
Boy leaves home, boy comes home.
Yeah. Let's go on to John Sherwood. John, you're next. Say hi to Nick.
Hello, Nick, and thank you for your shout out to Shaw. I am also a big fan. I was just ruminating on the fact that if you turn off the sound on the original film of Pygmalion with Wendy Hiller, and when she's escorted in to the main room, you can't tell if it's not a Sherlock Holmes show and Mrs. Hudson coming in and bringing in the client. It's astonishing how much it resembles. My question was, would there be any point in at this day and age, since the making of the film of the 7% Solution was actually a few decades ago, would there be any point in remaking it with some contemporary performers? And if so, who would you like to see play those parts?
Remaking the movie has been proposed to me. It would really ultimately be up to Universal, which owns the rights, to make that decision. But I think Daniel Day-Lewis would make a great Holmes if he could be, persuaded to act. I thought that David Robb, who plays the doctor on Downton Abbey, and who, as a young man, was one of the stars of I, Claudius, and also he starred with Pierce Brosnan for me in a movie that I directed in India called The Deceivers for Merchant Ivory. And when it came time to do the audio version of The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols, I picked David Robb to be the reader because I thought he would make a great Watson. And he obviously did. And I picked him again to read The Return of the Pharaoh because I wanted, among other things, an older English accent. I didn't want one of those Euro trash accents that comes out of Tony Blair's mouth, or Maggie Thatcher, what's her name, and or John Major. They don't sound English to me. I don't know what it is they sound like, but I wanted the real Oxbridge older generation sound, and David has that. So I think he looks physically right at this point to be Watson.
So we have some possibilities. Dennis Kaiser. Yeah. Dennis Kaiser, turn on your microphone and say hi.
Hi, how's it going? Just want you to know how much I enjoyed Time After Time, and was just wondering if you've ever thought of doing a project with Sherlock Holmes meeting H.G. Wells, because they're both kind of same time period. And I know in Time After Time, Wells uses the name Sherlock Holmes when he's in San Francisco, but I was just wondering.
I only know so many words in English, it turns out.
Well, you're the only speaker in a Sherlock Holmes Zoomcast that can bring my whole family out. So, but they're Trekkies. So, I have to bear with them while I sit between them.
Well, thank you. I have an idea for another Holmes book. And it will simply depend on how many copies of the present one sells, whether Minotaur Press, which turns out to be a division of St. Martin's, which turns out to be a division of Macmillan, which turns out to be a division of Planet Earth. I can't keep track. Whether they, will pay me money to write it. But I don't often get ideas, and so this one I was very surprised to have an idea for another one, and it's a humdinger.
Well, we can't wait.
I can tell you the title. It's Sherlock Holmes and the Telegram from Hell.
Ooh.
Like that.
Sounds good, doesn't it, Dennis? Dennis, it's great to see the whole family. That's terrific. Glad you're all here with us. That's wonderful. Tom Sinkin has a question. Tom.
Well, thanks very much, Alan. And hi, Nick. How great to see you. I have a real softball for you, but I'm genuinely interested in the answer, which is, what is your favorite Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes story and why?
Well, I don't have a favorite story. I have several favorites. And I'm not trying to be evasive. I'm trying to be truthful. in no particular order, whether we're talking about Silver Blaze, the Devil's Foot, the Speckled Band, the Red-Headed League, and the Bruce Parkinson plans. There's a bunch. What I thought to myself at a certain point, and I don't know whether I would still maintain this, but I'd like to hear what other people think. I think the 60 stories comprise a kind of layman's, I'm not sure layman is the right word, but it's like a Bible. It's like a Bible. Like the Bible has many stories in it. And I think cumulatively, these stories, I would like to think, help you sort of interpret the world, interpret life. And I like also stories where Holmes fails or gets things wrong, which I think add to his plausibility as a character. I like the fact that, at least for a time, he's a dope addict. And I get into a lot of conversations with, I think, thinking may have become more enlightened. But at the time, there are a lot of people who were very pissed off. And they said, oh, you made him a drug addict. And I said, first of all, I didn't make him a drug addict. Doyle made him a drug addict. But I think we confuse heroes with gods, and we want our heroes to be perfect. And great men and women, great artists are not necessarily good men and women or perfect or flawless. And I've said this example 100 times, but if a man leaps into a torrent to save a drowning child, we could probably all agree that he performs a heroic act. If the same man leaps into the same torrent to save the same kid and does it with a ball and chain attached to his leg, is he more heroic or less? I would argue that he's more heroic, and that Holmes's addiction and the fact that he functions despite it throws him into sharper relief as some kind of great man than might otherwise be the case if he's simply a pillar of virtue, a kind of plaster saint. So I like the stories in which he fails. I like the stories in which he is human and whether it's flashes of irritability or his drug problem. But I cannot single out a single story. And that's a tribute, I think, to the genius of Doyle, that they're not all great, but there's so many of them that are. It's really quite amazing to me.
Fair enough, and thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Edgar Russell next. Edgar.
Yes, thank you, Alan. Mr. Meyer, I was wondering if you have a special dream project which you have not yet been able to realize, and and how what you are doing to make it happen. I might also add that I see you have a small reproduction of Michelangelo's creation behind you. How has that inspired you, or why is that there? So it's a two-part question.
All my best screenplays have never been filmed. Company, I include The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt. I include The Crook Factory, based on the novel by Dan Simmons. I include my screenplay of Fifth Business from the novel by Robertson Davies. I include The Power Broker, my screenplay about the life of Robert Moses. They have never been filmed, which is wildly frustrating to me. I keep them in circulation. I put them out there. Nowadays, the movie business is in such flux that movies are big Hollywood movies tend to be comic book movies. They tend to be special effects driven films. And I'm still trying to make movies about people who are trying to figure out shit. And I'm more interested in heroes than superheroes, because I'm not sure what that is, except they wear capes or something. And so what is the proper venue for this? Maybe it's streaming, it's some form of television, but that seems to be more about a series and stretching things out, which is fine. It's how they, will go into profit. But for whatever reason, those films which are so dear to me, or scripts of which I am so proud, and I should add, artists are not the best judges of their own work. George Bizet writes the Toreador song, and his comment is, oh, well, the public wants shit, there it is. We just don't know. Artists are people who put messages in bottles. You throw it out there, hope somebody finds the bottle, pops the cork, and is able to decipher what you put in. But you're not going to be there when it happens. There's a reason that Moses doesn't get to cross the River Jordan and look back and see where he's been. So my opinion about my screenplays, in which I say I'm so proud, somebody else might read them and say, this is not your best work. Arthur Sullivan may have thought that Ivanhoe was his best, but the world thinks it's the Mikado. And as the French would say, firez-vous ça?
Who knows?
Thank you very much. I had a play that took 10 years to get brought to the stage, but it was worth it. So I understand your frustration.
We have somebody who joins us frequently at our Red Circle meetings who's further west than you are. He's over in Hawaii. His name's Joe Page, and he has a sort of technical question for you. Joe, you wanna do that?
Yes. Hi. Thanks, Alan. And hello, Nick. Aloha from Hawaii.
Hello again.
I just have a simple process question for you. I know that you use, I believe, Final Draft, for the screenplays, but I was wondering about your books. Do you use something like Scrivener or Word? What do you use to write the books?
Hang on, let me see. I think it's called Word. Yeah, it's Microsoft Word. What I want is something that looks like a page of typing paper, and and a lot of it, by the way, is preceded by a very high-tech thing that I will show you. This is it's too complicated to explain to a layman, but it involves this thing that which is sometimes a feather of a bird dipped in a concoction. It's basically legal pad and typing paper.
Very good. Thanks, Nick.
Somebody asked, sorry.
No, my curiosity was piqued by the previous question, because the picture of the creation in your office.
Just about to get back to that. I do, unlike Sherlock Holmes, or my girlfriend for that matter, do not have a particularly analytic brain. I was once having a conversation with her, and I was talking about how much I loved Cézanne, and she said, "Why?" And I said, "I don't know, I just do. I have a visceral, non-intellectual response to art, and that includes literature and music, and I'm not good at saying or figuring out why. I love Cézanne, I love Sherlock, I love Carmen or Madame Butterfly or that guy, and I'm not sure why. It just touches my guts. And then, people say, well, he wasn't a very good guy and he liked little boys. And I think, yeah, I understand that great people are not necessarily good people. And I wouldn't want to give him money. On the other hand, are we meant to throw out the only good things that these people did when we discover their flaws? Do we then judge them? Gee, the guy's a cocaine addict. That's disgusting. That's bad. I don't want to have anything to do with him. Or do we marvel at the ability that he can function with a ball and chain? Do we throw out the music of Richard Strauss because he was such a shit? I don't know, because like the music seems like the only decent thing he did. It's kind of like throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I'm sure this is an oversimplification, but it's the best I can do. I like the hands that and I couldn't fit the whole ceiling, so I just.
Thank you, sir. Val Hosky has a very interesting question. Val, say hi to Nick.
Do you want me to read my question?
Well, read it or ad lib it or do
Okay.
whatever you like.
Well, it's been my pleasure and my delight, to discover science much too late. It was during the abundance of science, but this during the times of COVID. But this question, though, relates to the popularity, or if you will, the durability of Holmes as a popular cultural icon or hero. Is he well known enough? Is our interpretation of, in other words, is he a man of all ages? Or is this a fictional hero, to speak, of all ages? Is there enough momentum or awareness of him in Anglo-American culture and so on, as well as international culture, to keep him going through, the 2120s all the way up to 2200? We don't have a crystal ball, but how do you see his durability?
Whatever I say is simply another opinion. It's can be no more valid and it's certainly, there's nothing definitive about this kind of speculation. Having said that, the best I can come up with is again the notion that Holmes seems to represent a kind of lay Bible. We like the way he approaches life and tries to understand it and help us understand it. I think he, as I said earlier, it sort of descends in a direct line from Quixote. He's a knight errant, but he's a knight errant who has one foot in a world that's long enough ago that it seems kind of mythical or fairy tale like or something romantic. But he's got the other foot in a world that is at the same time recognizable to us. It's a world with trains, with telephones, with telegraphs and things. So he straddles this divide between the past that we kind of idealize and a present that we find ourselves in, and trying to make sense of things that happen around us. And sometimes we understand him and sometimes we don't. But I think it's a fortunate sort of positioning for him and for Watson. I have to say, that Watson in Hollywood movies is frequently shortchanged as some kind of buffoon, which may explain why I despise most Sherlock Holmes movies, because I don't think they're true to Doyle. And I think Holmes is very vain. And I don't think he wants the admiration of a jerk. He wants the admiration of a regular person. And so I think the best interpretations of Watson are the ones that don't make him a bumbler, and where I believe that the actor, that Watson could be the person who writes down those stories. And that is not Nigel Bruce, because I don't understand why Holmes hangs out with that person. So that's the best I can. It's just another opinion.
Roger Kilshaw, who we heard from a little earlier, is back with a comment apropos of that. Roger, jump in and tell us about that.
There are young people in the United Kingdom today who believe that Winston Churchill was a character of fiction and Sherlock Holmes was a real person. But for me,
this is the consequence of Brexit.
Oh no, it's not. No, for most British people of a certain age, Holmes is the gifted gentleman amateur who doesn't have to do what he does, who outsmarts the professionals. And that has always been something that is very, very close to the British psyche. This amateur person who outsmarts the professionals and shows them where they're wrong.
I find it fascinating that people think that Churchill was fictitious. What's interesting is that the many views of Churchill. There was a certain point where he was simply idealized as the epitome of everything English that was wonderful. And lately there have been more nuanced views of him as an imperialist as well, and a racist. And I think there are so many movies and documentaries about Churchill that you could have a whole Churchill film festival. You could start with him as young Winston with Simon Ward, and go all the way forward with different people playing him and different views of him. But he's certainly, the idea that he's viewed as a fictitious person is very melancholy to me.
Yeah, that you've heard of a British historian called Andrew Roberts.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, well, you've met him. Well, yes, that's where I learned.
I've read him. I haven't met him.
Yes, very much. But also, I think that this woke culture that's swirling around, what they're actually doing in the case of Churchill is to criticize every previous generation to them, because there probably was in Europe as a whole, not just in Britain, but in France and Spain and Portugal, there was at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, a view of the hierarchy of races, that you got the white Anglo-Saxons at the top and then they all come down with the black people in Africa at the bottom. But also that the eugenics, which up to the start of the Second World War was a standard scientific theory.
Absolutely.
That is the end of our list of questions, and what a great question and answer period it's been. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. And of course, Nick, thank you so much for all of your wonderful discussions and input. Very, very much appreciated. Yesterday, as I was talking to Peter about what we were going to be doing today, I showed Peter a picture that I took in Egypt about 10 years ago. And I said, well, we can't possibly show this to the group because it's in bad taste. And Peter said, oh, yeah, we can, because bad taste is what we're all about here. So we were driving from Cairo to Alexandria, and I came upon this on a roadside rest stop. And
that's 18th dynasty.
Yes, I think so. And I presented for a syntactical error as nice a one as I've ever seen. So that was an Egyptian moment. But enough of that. Let's go back now to Peter Blau for some more interesting stuff. Peter.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Nick. Now we're meeting on December 4th rather than December 11th because we didn't want our meeting to be in conflict with the funeral of Michael F. Whelan in Indianapolis. Mike found the world of Sherlockians in the 1970s, and his business career took him all over the United States, enabling him to enjoy the fellowship of many Sherlockian societies, as well as the Baker Street Irregulars. He receives his investiture, Vincent Spalding, from the BSI in 1974, and the BSI's 2 Shilling Award in 1992. And he served as the BSI's Wiggins from 1977 to 2020. Mike launched the continuing series of BSI conferences, greatly expanded the work of the BSI Press, and created the BSI Trust, which presides over the BSI archives. He received a Golden Sovereign in 2017, marking his 20th year as head of the BSI. And if you'd like to know more about Mike, I recommend A Quiet Air of Mastery, the BSI's tribute volume to Mike, which was published by the BSI Press in 2020 and is still available at the BSI's website. That's www.bakerstreetirregulars.com. Now, Mike attended many Red Circle events over the years and was glad to be one of our members, and he will be greatly missed. Now, the most important upcoming event is the Sherlockian birthday festivities in New York during the very long weekend of January 12th through the 16th. Details will be found in the calendar at our website. And Tom Sinkin, who was in New York recently, has kindly recommended the smartphone app NYC COVID Safe, which allows easy storage of images of your vaccination card and picture ID, and is widely accepted in New York and probably elsewhere. You'll definitely need to show your vaccination status to get into the Grow Your Club to see Glenn Marenker's splendid exhibition of some of his Sherlockian and Doylean treasures. There's also information. If you scroll along the top of those buttons to see the gallery and the catalog, you'll see images of some of the things that are going to be on display. And this is going to be open from January 12th to April 16th, and it's well worth seeing. You're going to see things there that you never see anywhere else. Glenn is an energetic and careful collector. Onward. There's also information on our website on Malice Domestic, which will be held in Bethesda, April 22nd, and 3rd and 24th. It's a wonderful convention of mystery fans and authors. It's been going on. Well, actually, this is the 34th of them, if you don't count the online versions this year and last year. Next is the Sherlock Holmes and the British Empire Conference at Bear Mountain, New York, on July 29th through the 31st. The BSI conferences are always great, and this is going to be a lot of fun. We don't have a tag, but here's the Red Circle's pin, which is still available from Tom Fars. Alan, I think there's a link for that at the website.
There is.
Okay. And it is our tradition that anybody who attends a meeting of the Red Circle is a member. So, Nick, welcome to the Red Circle.
This is a big deal for me.
It's been a great deal of fun. And Peter, I just wanted to tell you that there are no longer there are no further questions and no announcements to be made. But as you know, we do have a word from our sponsor before we let you say goodbye. And the sponsor is a Russian bank, because Washingtonians know that the great Alex Ovechkin, number 8 of the greatest hockey team in the world, the Washington Capitals. Alex Ovechkin just has set the record for the fourth highest number of goals set in the entire National Hockey League. But he also appears in his native Russia now as a spokesman for a bank giving out loans. And we thought we would have a 15-second commercial from Mr. Ovechkin before we say goodbye. So here it is.
В кредитах для бизнеса бывает все запутано, как в детективе. Оформите онлайн-кредит для бизнеса на любые цели в ПСБ без залога и поручительства. ПСБ. Банк для бизнеса. Элементарно.
In any language, the last word is elementary. Peter, back to you for a couple of final words.
Randall Stocks annual informative nominations for the best Sherlock Holmes books and DVDs of the year can be found at his Best of Sherlock website, where he also recommends older Sherlockiana, all with helpful explanations of his choices. And if you're not already on our mailing list, you're more than welcome to let me know. There's a link at the website. If you'd like to receive our occasional announcements, one of which will be about our March meeting. And as I said, we have no idea whether it'll be virtual or not, but I guarantee we'll have fun. Special thanks to Alan, who's our skillful IT guide and who does so much work for our website and our virtual meetings.